You're listening to the Meditation and Attachment Podcast with George Haas. For more information, visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Mettagroup. That's patreon.com/METTAGROUP.
So welcome everybody. This is Meditation and Attachment, Deepening Your Practice. It's uh, February 18th, 2021 at 7:36 p.m. And we're doing a compassion cycle. And tonight I was going to talk about compassion practice for close people. Close people are the people in your inner circle. I like to talk about this in terms of Dunbar's research. So Robin Dunbar is a French neuroscientist, and he started this investigation into human relationships by wondering whether or not there was a limit to the capacity of the human brain to store maps of people's faces. One of the things that you may or may not know about human faces is that they take a lot of data for the brain to be able to recognize one from another. And it's very race specific because it takes so much data. If you don't have cross-racial experiences of significant intimacy, you don't learn to decode across race lines, and which is interesting with the attachment mechanism, because if you can't decode facial expressions, the attachment mechanism goes off and makes them other. So there's this built-in mechanism which increases that foreignness. One of the reasons why segregation is such a necessary idea to white supremacy is that if you have small children mixing between races, they learn to decode facial expressions across race lines, and then the tendency to make them other and the ease with which that happens is no longer possible in people. And so we have to pay attention to this in terms of our advocacy for children. But because it's so data intensive and so processing intensive to recognize a face, Dunbar thought it would be reasonable to assume that there was a limit to the capacity for the human brain to store that information. And I think that he was surprised by how low the number turned out to be. 150 is about the number he found in his research. There was another group that vehemently contradicted him and said that that was a ridiculous number, that the actual number was 220. But if you're looking at the difference between 150 and 220, it's still a remarkably small number. Compared to the 5,000 Facebook friends that you have, right? So they explored it further, and what they found was there's an active buffer for facial recognition where you can easily recognize somebody's face and associate the biographical information to them. And then there's the possibility of storing faces into the long-term memory. Have you ever had the experience of somebody coming up to you and recognizing you and remembering a conversation that they've had with you and you not remembering it, and then 5 minutes later you recall the details of that? That would be pulling the entry from long-term memory and activating it into the facial buffer. But it doesn't increase the capacity of the buffer. It just sends another one into long-term memory. Christian?
That just made sense of an experience I had. I had a therapist for a year, and then I saw her like a year later at the grocery store, and I was just thinking, oh, that girl must be like really into me because she's like staring at me. I have no idea who that is. And then I walked out to my car, I drove home, and then on the way home, I was like, oh my God, it was my therapist.
Exactly that. So once Dunbar evaluated how many faces the mind could evaluate or hold in that buffer, he then wanted to look at what was a good number of people to know in order to have a rich social life, and how do most people structure that? And so he began to examine that. And what he discovered was that in intimate relationships, there are relationships that you tell everything, you tell somebody everything. And when we say everything, what we mean is that you are willing to tell somebody what your experience of the present moment is in enough detail that they understand what's going on with you in that moment. It's not, the litany of horrible things that you've done over your entire life that you preciously inscribe on a scroll and then share with somebody. It's just this unfiltered, open response to the experience of the present moment that you're having. If you are frightened of being abandoned, of course, you're unwilling to do that. You shape it or spin it or massage it in such a way that you don't feel that they'll abandon you if you express what's going on. But in intimate, close relationships, you're able to express that pretty freely. And your expectation is that people will respond positively to that, no matter what it is that your experience is. He did a survey and found that people tend to divide up relationships by how much resources they use, so time, energy, and resources. That A relationships are people that you take care of on a daily or every other day basis. B relationships are people that you take care of weekly or every other week, at least monthly. C relationships are people that you take care of quarterly, say, and D relationships are people that you see maybe once or twice a year in some prescribed situation. I think what he found remarkable about that was that a lot of people keep their family in the D group, that they see them only in holiday situations, or the majority of them. Most people who have A relationships have one relationship in that category. Most people who have A relationships like those relationships to have a sexual component or a romantic component to them because they're so energy intensive. That the happiest people were people that had an A if they wanted one, a group of B relationships. When he did the survey, there was a bell curve to say 2 to 5 relationships. Imagine having to take care of somebody in person on a weekly basis. How many of those relationships could you have? People that you tell everything to, and that they tell everything to you, so that you have to have that openness there. And then the C group, he found between 30 and 40 people who are adult aged. Younger people tend to have more people in the C group because of the nature of that kind of life, and people who are older tend to have fewer. And then the whole group being about 150, if you add the Ds into that. And I said that the happiest people have A's and B's and C's, but he found that most adults do not operate in that way. Most adults, he found, had one A, no B's, and C's and D's. And the distribution of energy was 40% of the relational energy into the A and 60% of the relational energy into the C's and D's. Whereas the happiest people put 60% of the relational energy into the A's and B's, and 40% of the relational energy into the C's and D's. So one of the reasons why I like to talk about it in this way is so that you have a sense of what the structure of a whole social life would be. Obviously, depending on what your attachment conditioning is, that has a great impact on how you organize the social relationships. The further out you are from secure, the more restricted most people are in the number of relationships they have, and also the closeness of the relationships that they had. For years, working in rehabs, it was very ordinary for the people in the rehab to have no A's or B's, and mostly D's and some C's. That was how they organized their relationship life. Really, the more fearful they were, the less willing they were to actually be open and spontaneous in the expression of their experience of the present moment. So we're talking about compassion in the Buddhist sense, which is a practice that's narrowly focused on the suffering experience of other people. So in English, compassion means means to share, and passion means feeling. So shared feeling. So what we're really talking about is empathy, the empathetic connection to other people. And if we talk about that in terms of practice for close people, in a traditional practice, that really would have meant friends, family members mainly, family and close friends. I teach these practices in the way that Sayadaw Indica teaches them. And in the traditional categories of practice, it's practice for self, practices for teachers, mentors, and benefactors, practice for friends and family, practice for neutral people, difficult people, and then all sentient beings. But he said in the West that wasn't actually the easiest way to practice. That where in Asia you would always start with practice for yourself. In the West, because of the way that we're socialized, often people are hold themselves with such harshness. It's hard to come into that space of either loving kindness or compassion or sympathetic joy. And so he talks about a category of easy person, which you'll remember we did a couple of weeks ago. And he equates the easy person to teachers, mentors, and benefactors because in Asia there's a sort of reverence to that category of people that makes them easy to practice for. We don't really have that same corresponding experience here. So that he talks about this category of easy person, and we practiced it quite a bit, really thinking of an entire list of everyone we know, and then spending an hour practicing with each person that we know to see who might be easy, and that is the sense who might open up that space for us, that mind state for us. And so with compassion, when we talk about an easy person, we're talking about somebody that when we think of them, the mind naturally inclines to a willingness to hold their suffering experience. Who is that? And one of the things that's important about that is typically there are simple relationships where you don't have much of a self-experience or much of a complexity in terms of the kinds of mind states that you hold the relationship with, so that it's easy to come into that place of being willing to hold the shared experience of someone. Also, they typically don't have so much suffering that we become overwhelmed by the experience of their suffering and need to disengage from that empathetic embrace of them. In adult relationships, of course, particularly intimate relationships, if you want to be really of service to somebody, you have to be able to hold an intense emotional experience, because if your close person is going out into the world and exploring and they get hit by something that knocks them sideways and they come back to you and they're looking for you to be able to hold their experience and help them re-regulate and come back into balance, which is the activity of compassion. If you don't have a great capacity to do that, or at least a capacity that matches their capacity to get a throne, then what we tend to begin to do unconsciously is to attempt to limit their exploration so that they don't get so discombobulated and it isn't so difficult for us to have to hold that experience when they come back to us. Remember, in a close relationship, they come back and they're open to expressing to us the whole range of what their experience is, what their response is to the present moment. And if we are constantly overwhelmed by the intensity of those expressions, either we begin to withdraw from them or we begin to recommend that they limit the explorations that they're engaged in. And with close people, of course, you want to be able to give them an unfiltered I should say, not entirely unfiltered, filtered through right speech, of course. Is it kind? Is it truthful? Is it helpful? And so on. To reflect back your authentic experience of what they're presenting to you. And so you're not letting them go completely off the rails and into an area where they might be harmed, but you're encouraging and supporting them to find things that are meaningful in a way that's useful and supportive. So this big capacity to hold their experience is really useful in adult relationships, so that they know that they can really go risk in their exploration because they have this secure base that they can explore from. That would be the idea of this. One of the things about this, of course, is that in intimate relationships, the working model is quite complex, and there's a lot of different kinds of mind states that you're used to holding with the other person. A wide range, really. Joyfulness, anger, neediness, all sorts of different things come up in these kind of close relationships. A pleasant exchange of care, all of it. And so holding that space, that compassionate space for somebody who's suffering. I know in my role as a meditation teacher, often there's a resistance to my presentation of my suffering to people because I'm supposed to be the surrogate father figure. I'm supposed to be the one that's always able to provide care. And that can be quite limiting in terms of my own interpersonal relationships if I'm expected not to have that vulnerability, that openness. And I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't want those kinds of restrictions, those kind of roles put on me. And so I think that's something to really pay attention to in terms of this activity of compassion. Can you be free to support and encourage somebody to explore, particularly solo exploration, if that means that they're going to temporarily leave you to explore? One of the reasons that people who have A's and B's are happier is because they can be encouraging of people to go explore, even if that means a temporary separation, because they have other people that they can turn to during those moments to help regulate them. Whereas if you really only have one intimate, supportive relationship, then if they want to go explore separately from you, you're in a position of not actually having adequate support while they're away, and you might find unconsciously or consciously a process of inhibiting them from separating from you, so that you don't have to have the experience of being without an emotional regulator available to you when you need it. But it may also inhibit your own exploration because your unwillingness to go and leave behind your regulator. Is that all making sense? So in that place of the close person, there's a complex working model of them and the relationship that you have. So it's not so as simple as holding somebody who isn't so close. We're opening to the suffering experience of someone else, allowing the empathetic exchange with them, bringing our capacity to emotionally regulate to the empathetic experience, and then as it's transmitted back and forth, they receive a more regulated experience of their own suffering, which helps them to come back into emotional balance. The compassionate thing to do, of course, if you're overwhelmed by somebody else's suffering, is to disconnect and go into a sympathetic mode temporarily so that you can rebalance yourself, and then reconnect empathetically so that you can help them balance. It's not useful to not be able to disconnect empathetically from somebody and become dysregulated, or as as dysregulated as they are, and then neither one of you has the capacity to help the other in terms of regulation, and those kinds of experiences tend to escalate into arguments that can be painful for both parties. The near enemy of compassion is sympathy, so we need to really be able to tell the difference between when we're actively engaged empathetically with somebody else and when we're disengaged from them. But this is also a useful way of moderating your own distress at the direct experience of their suffering, so that you can keep a sense of balance when you're working with them. One of the things, the far enemy, of course, is cruelty, the sense of cruelty that comes up. And cruelty is an easy way to disengage empathetically from someone else. You devalue them. You, in some sense, cause harm toward them so that they'll withdraw their empathetic request of you. It's a way of distancing. This, is associated with different attachment strategies in different ways. Dismissing people tend to be, particularly dismissing people who use anger as a way of controlling, derogating anger, in particular devaluing anger, or a way of regulating their own attachment experience. A dismissing person who fears abandonment often engages in the activity of cruelty as a way of regulating that experience. If somebody that you value is threatening to abandon you and you devalue them so that they're not worth anything, then it doesn't matter whether they abandon you, because what difference would it make if somebody worthless abandons you? You see this in terms of the way that we construct these social maps, these social hierarchies where we peg certain qualities at a high level and other qualities lower. We are very social creatures, and every time we walk in a room, this activity of creating a social hierarchy happens, and then we peg ourselves where we think we land in that social hierarchy. Every time you walk into a room, there's this activity of forming a social hierarchy. Christian?
Is that social hierarchy, am I deciding what I value and pegging myself according to that system, or am I deciding what the room values and pegging myself according to that system?
The former. You have your preferred objects, right? And so when you walk into a room, you're scanning the environment looking for your list of preferred objects. If you find a room that's rich with the objects that you value, then the environment is stimulating. And if you walk into an environment and there's a decided absence of the things that you find stimulating, then the environment is boring or barren. And the same is true of people. When you walk into a room, you create the sense of their value based on that database, your personal database of what's interesting to you. It might be quite interesting to notice. I find this. I'll give you an example. I'm gay, so my mind tends to value beautiful men over beautiful women. But I know a lot of straight people, and they tend to value beautiful men, for instance, tend to value beautiful women more. And so I'm at the have you ever been to Venice Beach in California? There's a particular place where they do this sort of acrobatic yoga, if you know what I mean. So it's usually a man and a woman, and the man is the sort of the base, and the woman is doing some yoga posture, and they're being supported by arms and legs, and there's a dozen people doing it. But on this particular occasion, it was 4 men who were doing it and together, and it was this quite acrobatic thing. And I was sitting with my friend, and I said, "What yoga position is that?" And he said, plank. I said, plank. And then I looked, and through the whole array of male bodies, right behind him was a woman doing plank. So that he completely didn't see the whole array of bodies in front of him. He saw through them to the object that was of interest. And so what you'll notice is that when you go into an environment and you construct it, you're doing that. You're constructing it in a way that it's organized around what's valuable in your frame of reference, and that's what conceptual reality is when you see it. And it can be marvelous, really entertainingly distorting once you sort of pick up on it and you don't take it so seriously as a representation. But you definitely create a social hierarchy and depend on where you land. And of course, that's affected by attachment conditioning. Dismissing people tend to peg themselves at the top and everybody falls below. Secure people tend to actually look at the room and look for things that are interesting to them, but they tend to put themselves at the same level as things that are interesting to them. And they tend to be open to engaging around interests. Remember these views. A secure person thinks of themselves as capable of getting their needs met, and they think of other people as open to meeting their needs. They understand that in exchange for that, they have to take care of the other person. And so they're reluctant to move too quickly into a relationship until they're confident that the other person can actually reciprocate in a way that's meaningful. In a secure dynamic, you take care of the other person in the way they want to be taken care of, and they take care of you in the way that you want to be taken care of. And so also there's an understanding that if I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to take care of you over a long period of time, I'm going to need to enjoy or be okay with taking care of you in the way that you want to. Otherwise, I won't do it, and then you won't be taken care of, and then you will withdraw care from me. So there's that collaborative understanding. And so secure people tend to go a little bit slower than rushing in. They don't need to trade the proximity for the regulation of their abandonment experience, and they tend to set up their lives in a way that's more orderly. Dismissing people, of course, are always pegging themselves at the top of the heap, and everybody else is falling below in some way. That's that devaluing that they tend to do. Preoccupied people tend to look at a room, create a social hierarchy, and then are drawn to the people at the top of the hierarchy. But they tend to think of themselves as not the driver of exploration, and so they're looking for other people who have the capacity to explore, so they can hitch their wagon to it. And disorganized people, fearfully preoccupied people will look in a room and be frightened of engaging people. They'll be longing to do it, but they'll be worried that something will go wrong, and then they'll be disappointed again. And fearful avoidant people are really very content not to attempt to engage much. But then if you do engage them, they tend to be incredibly effusive because they're so socially isolated that that some sense of positive regard, and they just sort of it's like a bursting of the dam of all of the things that they've been withholding that they want to exchange, so much so that they don't notice that they don't leave time or space for the other person to engage in a balanced conversation. So we're opening to the suffering experience of other people, and it's really about the experience of the present moment. Can you be with somebody and feel safe enough to really exchange with them an understanding of what your experience of the present moment is, understanding that inherently each of you will have a different view of the present moment because your conditioning is different. And so you have this possibility of an exchange it's quite intimate. And if you don't react with abandonment, or the attachment mechanism isn't activated, and you don't feel frightened in that way, and you don't have a lot of strong identification with self and what that means, then you can really take in the experience of the other person and be quite free to express your own experience of what's happening. You know, it can be frightening for some people to walk into a room full of people. It can be, and so that little bit of suffering can be held compassionately, and so that they then can feel a sense of safety to explore from. This is that secure base of supporting and encouraging in just the right way, so that the other person can really be free to explore to the depth that they want to go. Have you noticed going out to something alone and going out with somebody else, the experience is quite different? How much easier, or at least for me it is, how much easier it is to go with somebody else, and then to mingle and meet people that you don't know is easier, at least when I have that sense of a good co-regulator, then that makes it easy. With the group of close people, then the idea is that they're really good at co-regulating you, and that it's an almost automatic thing that happens, so that you don't have to spend much time on it. Just the experience of being with each other is regulating for each other. And then that capacity really to allow them to feel deeply and express that to you, so that you can help them manage it, so that all of that really just furthers this capacity to explore deeply. And that if you don't have that, what you begin to notice is that there's a limiting to your willingness to explore, because there's a limit to the amount of distress that you're willing to hold without somebody helping you. And it can get to the point, of course, where you're limiting it to the point that you are in despair about the meaningfulness of life. So we have this other piece of the meaningfulness of things. What has meaning? We all have this desire, really, I think, to be seen, to be known by somebody else. And in that, being completely seen and known by them, delighted in and loved, just in that way that we are. And this is also, I think, part of this process of really being open to all of that experience of the other person. Stas, did you want to say something? You unmuted, but I can't hear you.
What about people, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What about people that feel frightened when they're seen?
So in a compassionate response to that, of course, you would be able to pick up on the fearfulness of the other person, and then you'd be able to reassure them that you are not going to harm them. And in that exchange, they would know that. So remember, the empathy has those three levels. The first is the visceral response to the experience of someone else's physical or emotional pain. That's the opening to compassion. The second is to be able to read them, their external expression, facial expression, body language. And the third is the compassionate empathy, where you experience in your body a facsimile of what they're feeling in their body. We tend to use the second and third level of empathy, and to evaluate whether somebody's telling us the truth or not, and if their external presentation and your internal experience of them match, then we believe what they're saying. Secure people, of course, have this feature where they then compare that to what they do. And insecure people tend to split that off because their childhood experiences are that they don't match. So the empathetic experience at the second and third level could match, but what they actually do doesn't match. And for children, it's actually thought to be less anxiety provoking to disregard what they actually do and just accept what they say and how they feel. And so we really want to pull that, if we're not doing that, pull that back, so that we're comparing the empathetic experience of the person with what they do. And so when you have somebody who's fearful, you have to make sure that the behavior really matches consistently with that non-harming stance, where they won't be able to open enough to settle. The fearfulness is hard to settle. When you look at it through the attachment lens, particularly more toward the disorganized ends of things, the attachment mechanism goes off, which compels you to seek physical proximity. And if the caregiver is the source of the distress, then you're being compelled to seek proximity to the person that's actually frightening you. And that's what creates that bind, where we then have to split off what people actually do. So you go slowly, and you reassure enough, and then your behavior is consistently non-harming. I mean, your behavior should probably be consistently non-harming anyway. But part of this is also negotiating communication styles. One of the example that was always given in the training that I did was, you have a family. They did this. You have a family from Connecticut, right? That in the entire childhood, their parents raised their voice twice, and they're going out with somebody who's from Brooklyn, and at every meal they just yelled at each other the whole meal. And so they got together, and one would yell, and the other person would be totally freaked out by the yelling. But the yelling didn't mean the same thing in the two systems of communication, and so they needed to negotiate a settlement in terms of what that actually means, one to the other. I can give you an example from my own life. I had a sadistic father, and if you did something and he felt that justified an opening for his sadistic expression, he would say, "Oh," and then it would be followed by the abuse. And then I had a good friend, and he grew up in a family system where if somebody wanted to soothe you, they would start with, "Oh." Every time he said "oh" to me, I would tense up and withdraw from him just instinctively, because I was conditioned to have a different meaning associated. And it took years to come out of that automatic bracing. And he had a really hard time remembering that it meant something entirely different to me. And so it was an interesting thing. After a while, of course, the settling was quite quick. But in the beginning, it was quite startling that would be happening. And so we're each conditioned in terms of the meaning of things beyond the conventional meaning of things. And in intimate relationships, we really do need to open to the understanding of what actually is happening to the other person, which is this idea of this compassionate response to the other person's experience. Would be one thing to say, "Well, I don't mean that, so you should just get used to it." Not particularly helpful. But it also would be equally not useful for me to say you can never do that, because the two conditionings don't really allow for that. There needs to be a way of negotiating it. And then over time, as you take in the experience over and over again of awe in his vocabulary, meaning it is then followed by a comforting gesture, which is very different than awe in mine. You may have known me for 10 years and I never once said awe, except in this example. You know what I mean? So, any questions about all of this before we do? Jacqueline?
I do have a question. What happens if you're A and B people that's perhaps there are just a few, like between 1 and 4, maybe
Right.
1 in the A and maybe 3 in the B? What
That sounds
happens
like
if
a good
you
number.
what happens if you're surrounded by people that are hurt and have a tendency to hurt you? And so you have a fear of being that figure for them, of openness to be that support for them, because you're fearful that they will hurt you. And, these are just people that maybe you
The question
choose to
would
be.
be,
Yeah.
is it something that you're just fearful of, or do they actually hurt you?
Oh no, they actually hurt the, and maybe it's like, you have, I guess my understanding is you don't want to have people who are constantly around you that are hurting you, but maybe, you care, like perhaps it's a relative or a significant other, and maybe sometimes you don't have a choice to get away, or maybe I guess there's always a choice, but is there any way to have a healthy relationship with people like that are that close to you?
I would, this is maybe sounding harsh, but I would demote them to a C or a D. So you don't tell them everything, and you would it's really more about flows of energy. I mean, you do make the request that you can't hurt me, and if they don't, or if they're unable to abide by that, then you need to remove yourself from the situation. And that may seem daunting to do, but the idea then is to turn toward people that don't hurt you. So rather than necessarily making it totally abrupt, unless there's a real danger there, then you want to flow energy toward people that are not harming, away from people that are harming. That's what it is. Mainly, it's about energy flows. You flow energy into people that are supportive and away from people who are not supportive. And then it tends to balance out.
Yeah, so there's no realistic way then to have people like that where you're kind of, because you're just too fearful to be that support for them, that open person for them, to give them comfort. It's just kind of not possible. I mean,
Well, they
yeah.
can't be in the close category if you're not free to be open. If you have to be guarded, they're not actually in those categories, even if you're putting that kind of time, energy, and resources in. And then one of the things that happens is if you're putting A and B, time, energy, and resources into somebody who's a C or a D, there's often a sense of resentment or things being out of balance, because too much energy is flowing into a relationship that isn't going to be reciprocal. Collaborative relationships, of course, you take care of them because they take care of you, not in absence of that. You take care of them in the way that they want to be taken care of, and they take care of you in the way that you want to be taken care of, and you're collaborating actively with each other, so each of you is taken care of in a good enough way.
Yeah.
With the resources that you have available between you. And it's often unequal, somebody getting more than the other person is getting. The other person doesn't mind that because they're also taken care of. So they're not going without so that one person can have the care, which would be, say, a dismissing with preoccupied person. The dismissing person gets all the care and the preoccupied person is not cared for. Those relationships are less stable because the preoccupied person ultimately burns out because they're not being taken care of and they don't want to do it anymore. So the relationships come apart unless the dismissing person is willing to provide a minimal amount of care so that the preoccupied person doesn't burn out. That's kind of how it goes. But you have to is such a strong word. There's this when you grow up in families where that kind of abusive behavior happens, it has a different value to it. It seems ordinary if you can't normalize it as being unwanted. And so I call it normalizing, but if you come from a family where bad things happen routinely, they seem ordinary, right? But when you compare that to a family where those things never happen, you begin to get a sense of the difficulty of them, which you wouldn't know just from being in the environment that you're in. And so we turn toward this compassion for ourselves, of course, where we're really allowing this information in and then beginning this process of valuing ourselves so that we can then move in a direction that actually is supportive of our exploration, which is the central thing in life. The way where meaningfulness comes from for us is from our exploration, exploring the things that have meaning to us. And the people around us should be supporting us in doing that. And if they're not doing that, it makes it too hard for us to explore, to find that meaningfulness. And so we really need to begin to choose that so that we're actually willing to be alive, because it's too hard otherwise, I think. Not making sense.
George, I have a question.
Sure.
So I have two questions actually. One of them is so if you demote someone from A to B or from B to C, it's not because they're not reciprocating enough, it's not being petty, right? According to what you're saying.
No, it isn't.
Okay. Because for the longest time, I feel like, when there are certain people who I feel like I'm giving, I'm giving, but they're not giving back. And then I would automatically demote them in my mind. And I thought maybe I'm just being petty. So that's actually normal behavior. That's regular, healthy behavior.
Yeah, that's a good thing. No,
Okay.
I really talk about energy flows. It's time, energy, and resources, which you have a finite amount of.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that it was true that you could have limitless amounts of all of that, but that doesn't seem to be how it is. So then you need to use your time, energy, and resources to explore what's meaningful to you. But then you also have to understand that in order for you to really explore, you're going to get knocked sideways and you're going to need people who will help you. And so you have to put time, energy, and resources into maintaining your secure base.
Mm-hmm.
Once you really discover that a good regulator that's available to you at any time when you need them supports your exploration in a fantastic way, then it's totally worth the resources for that. Because if you don't have that, you won't take those risks. I mean, I'm not talking about crazy risks, but I'm talking about risks where you find something out that you're really interested in, and that you succeed in being able to do that. But you could find out something that was upsetting, and then you'd have somebody who would help you, and somebody who would be interested in what you found out, so that you have that complete cycle of expressing and exchanging the information from your exploration, and that they're eager and interested in what you're doing. You have that sense of they're delighting in it, which is, and the sense of joyfulness in it, which is the energy of exploration, right? And then you do that for them because you understand the value of it. But you also understand the limit of energy and how much you want to have for your own exploration. And if you're giving it to people that are not available to support you, then it's actually in the end detracts from your capacity to explore.
Okay. And then so a quick question about the definitions of like different groups, right? So if you have someone that you like, when you say A, it's someone that you feel like you can open up to, right?
Right.
But if it's, I have friends whom I don't see that often because they live so far away, but every time when I see them, I feel like they're an A friend. So are they then considered like in the A category or the C category? Or is A just people that you can really open up to, but not necessarily, it's not necessarily about frequency?
Well, there's above the line and below the line.
Okay. What's
Above
that
the
mean?
line, you're in the movie business, right? Above the line is the talent, below the line is the crew. No, that's not it. Above the line is the people you tell everything to about the present moment, and below the line are people that you tell some things about it. And then there's the energy flows. Are you capable of seeing the person in in the flesh on a daily or every other day basis? And you take care of them then, or a weekly or every other week basis? That's a B. If they're a C and they live across the country, then you don't have the physical proximity to them for them actually to do the B role. So you want to flow energy to keep you want your simmering C's, I like to say, because you could lose a B and then you'll need to promote somebody. It's fluid, right?
Okay. So it seems like it's both about the energy flow and like I guess like it's both about how willing you are to open to them and also the actual frequency of contact, right?
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
That's it. All right. Why don't we meditate? What do you think? Everybody all right? We went a little long on the talking part, so it's not much time left. Christian?
Hopefully I have a quick one. You mentioned during the meditation that you can replace like a negative mind state with a positive one. And I'm wondering if that's something we automatically want to do, or if that's something we more want to have a choice to do, because I wonder if sometimes we don't want to replace the negative mind state because that might be like unhealthy or it's something that we kind of need to be with more.
I would say no. If you have an afflictive mind state, get rid of it as fast as you can. No point in staying there. This is also true of afflictive self-generated emotion states. There's no point in regulating with them if you don't have to. The Buddha was very clear about being guarded in your mind states and only allowing virtuous mind states. And if you're a Tibetan practitioner and rainbow body is your goal, then you definitely want to eradicate all afflictive mind states for a minimum of 13 years so that you can dissolve into light. So yeah, no need to stick around with them. And I think that there's some confusion about the Western psychological use of staying with things that are difficult. I'm not saying in any way to turn away from difficult experience. In fact, you would want to, if you had difficult material to deal with, do it with a mind state of compassion rather than a mind state of anger, say, for instance. Then you intentionally cause the mind state of compassion to arise, and then you turn toward the difficult material, and it just makes it easier to manage that way rather than getting spun out with one of the afflictive mind states. Someone else? All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and practicing. A week from Saturday, I'm doing the meditation and attachments for coupling, which is a class on the collaborative relationship skills. So come to that. It starts at 9 and ends at 4. in April, at the end of April, I'm doing a 2-day weekend retreat on meditation and attachment for addiction. So if you have substance or process addiction issues, or you're in relationship to somebody who does, this would be useful to come to. We'll do the first 3 modules, which are related to emotional regulation, on Saturday, and then we'll do the 4th module on Sunday, which is about attachment dynamics in relationships and how to really be in secure functioning relationships, even if you haven't done the deep work of uprooting your early attachment conditioning. Because if you can get yourself into secure functioning relationships, you have much more support to do the deep work. It's a relapse prevention oriented class, so that it also helps with maintaining abstinence or harm reduction with your addiction strategies. We're starting a level 2 on March 18th. So if you're interested in going into a deeper dive on the attachment material, the level 2 class is starting on the 18th. We do have some scholarships available for that, so take a look at that. It's on the website. What else? And then we have a retreat coming up in June. So that's everything I think that we're offering. I offer this class on a dana basis. Dana is the Pali word for generosity, which means I offer the teachings freely. I do hope that you'll support us by making a donation. There's a link on the website or in an email if you've gotten one about the class. Any amount is appreciated. Of course, if you're not resourced, it's a challenging time, then we as a community are very happy to support the practice space for you. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you again soon, I hope. Bye.
Thank you, George.
Thanks. Bye.